Hey, good morning. I'm Patricia Murphy. It's Thursday. This is Seattle Now. When Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket exploded last week, it affected NASA's space aspirations, but also private companies like Amazon. In a minute, the New York Times Karen Weise will tell us about the fallout from the Kent-based company's launchpad disaster. But first, let's get you caught up. Future funding for Seattle bus service and light rail will be on your ballot this November. And in front of the City Council today, they'll hear Mayor Katie Wilson's proposal to renew the Seattle Transit measure. She wants to double the sales tax for transit for the next 10 years to fund more frequent bus service and light rail expansion. The new measure would go into effect next year if approved by both the council and voters. The meeting starts at 9:30 this morning. Here's some good news. 2 Seattle waterfront parks reopened this morning. Myrtle Edwards Park and Centennial Park are ready for visitors after renovations began last year through the privately funded Elliott Bay Connections project. Seattle cyclists are ready to hit the park's revamped trails. The parks, connected by the Elliott Bay Trail, even have new amenities like restrooms, picnic tables, and even a coffee shop. And outdoor Zoo Tunes concerts at Woodland Park Zoo begin tonight. The band Yacht Rock Review kicks off the season. They're known for performing covers from Steely Dan to Hall & Oates. Throughout the summer, the zoo will host more than a dozen artists, including Belle and Sebastian and Suki Waterhouse. Concerts continue through August 20th. We're back with more headlines on tonight's episode of Seattle Now. For years, Elon Musk's SpaceX has dominated the space race and launches. Jeff Bezos' company, Blue Origin, was finally in a position to give SpaceX some competition until last week. That's when the New Glenn rocket exploded on the launch pad. Thankfully, no one was harmed, but it's a major setback for Kent-based Blue Origin. Karen Weise is the technology correspondent for the New York Times. She's here to explain just how wide-reaching the New Glenn explosion's effects are. Karen, thanks so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So the explosion of Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket last week was dramatic. What were they doing that day?
They were testing the rocket in advance of one of the first launches it was going to do with a bunch of satellites for Amazon. And it was bolted down to the launch pad when it had this enormous explosion. And rockets explode. This happens particularly when you're starting these kind of new generation of rockets. But this was on the launch pad. So what made it particularly devastating was it impacted all this physical infrastructure on the ground. And this is New Glenn's only launch pad. So now they need to rebuild parts of it in order to pick up where they left off, essentially.
Wow. Okay, so what do you know now about what caused the explosion?
They called an anomaly, and it's still under investigation. So it's a good question, and it's not yet known. If it ends up being related to the engines itself, it could have a ripple effect because not only does Blue Origin use those engines, but a competitor, ULA, uses them as well on their more advanced modern rocket that they're also developing. So that's a big question mark people in the industry will be looking at.
Yeah, something to look into for sure. Okay, you mentioned a little bit about the launch pad being destroyed. How big of a setback was this disaster?
This week, Dave Limp, the CEO of Blue Origin, said that they expect to have it up and ready to launch again by the end of the year. I think, I've seen many people refer to that as ambitious. Not only do they have to figure out why New Glenn exploded and fix that, it harmed the infrastructure for launching. It really hurt the launch pad. And New Glenn only has this one launch pad. And the whole industry really has a shortage of launch capacity. So there's not enough space on rockets going up to satisfy the demand for space to get things into space.
Help listeners understand how large this rocket was. And yeah, the explosion was viewable for miles.
Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket, which is many, many, many times larger than the New Shepard rockets you may have seen before for the kind of space flight kind of stuff, the Katy Perry situation. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, it's over 300 feet tall. It's just a massive rocket whose goal is to be able to repeatedly at kind of an industrial scale lift satellites and other space infrastructure out into space. So things like lunar landers, satellites for Amazon or for other customers. And so it's meant to be repeatable and to be reusable and just big, frankly. So it's not quite as large as SpaceX Starship, which you may have heard of, which is launching out of Texas, but it's bigger than the Falcon 9 rocket that SpaceX uses that is kind of in a very heavy use right now.
Who else is invested in the rocket's success, and how might it impact them, this explosion?
Yeah, this is really important for Amazon because Amazon has been building what's now called Amazon Leo, and it's a competitor to Starlink, which is SpaceX's satellite internet service. And Starlink has been up for a long time. They have about 10,000 satellites up in space. If you've used it, it's quite reliable. Despite Starlink's advantage and head start, Amazon sees a good market, a big market for more internet to come from satellites. And so to do that, they need to get a lot of satellites up into orbit. They have about 300 so far. They've talked about beginning commercial service later this year. But to really get more coverage of the Earth, over the Earth, and faster speeds and more reliable service, they need to have more rockets carry more satellites. And roughly a third of the satellite launches that they have scheduled are supposed to go up on New Glenn. So they really need it ultimately to create the kind of cadence and the saturation that they want. And it's important for NASA as well, because Blue Origin is involved in NASA's efforts to return to the moon. And it's sort of like a hauler. It kind of is hauling material out there for NASA, or supposed to.
I can see tons of satellites in orbit when I open up that little app on my phone, Karen Weise. Why are private industries so eager to send satellites into space?
It used to be satellite internet was very expensive, and you would have a couple of huge satellites way out in space. It was very expensive to get there, and therefore the service was very expensive. But as kind of SpaceX created this new market, essentially, to be able to expand internet connectivity to places that don't have it. And this could be anywhere from rural Washington state. I've used it in the Methow Valley, for example. It could be in the middle of Africa. It could be in all kinds of different places. And they also see a corporate or enterprise use for this. So an example for Amazon might be there's an offshore drilling rig that has sensors on it, and it can then beam its data up to a satellite through space, essentially, and then down to an Amazon data center where whatever oil and gas company can then use the data from that to monitor leaks or monitor production in a different way.
How much of the current space race is private industry versus government-driven?
A huge amount is private industry. There is government support for it, and there are big, important government contracts. I mean, obviously, NASA is a big part of that. There was a long time where we weren't really doing space exploration anymore, and it's been revived in recent years. And part of that is this ability now to launch things more. There's still a kind of crisis in the industry of not enough capacity to launch things, but SpaceX really showed if you can make launch relatively inexpensive, you can actually do a lot out in space. And so there's a whole kind of burgeoning industry around that. There's a defense component to this of both defense satellites. There are some kind of talk of, I guess you could say, like weaponry in space. So there is a whole industry that's being built up around that. But the biggest bottleneck is actually the launch capacity.
SpaceX has a highly anticipated plan to go public this month.
Yeah.
What could this Blue Origin explosion mean for the competition between these two companies and SpaceX's public launch?
Yeah, I've heard two things in reporting on this. One is that it just shows how ahead SpaceX is in this effort broadly, but it's also a reminder to investors that this is very difficult work. Things explode. There is infrastructure that they depend on, and it's just very hard and expensive. I mean, part of the calculus of a space company is you have to invest so much in developing next generation rockets and the infrastructure for that. And then you make it up over a very long period of time as you sell launch space. But it's a huge upfront investment, and that is not always predictable. And this is a good example of that. So there's kind of two sides of it. It can kind of cut both ways. And I should say, it's kind of interesting. I've talked to SpaceX investors who actually want Blue Origin to succeed, because right now SpaceX is so far ahead in terms of launch capacity and launch capabilities that if people want there to be a space industry, if you're investing in SpaceX, presumably you do, they actually want a more robust ecosystem than just one provider. And so I've seen even some, fans of SpaceX still really hope that Blue Origin can turn this around quickly and can figure out why New Glenn exploded, and to be able to get over that and to be able to create a reusable model that can be productive, essentially.
How could this show up at Amazon or here in the Seattle area, Karen?
Yeah, the few things, Amazon says it should still be able to launch its commercial service of the satellite business later this year. Its satellites were kind of ready to be loaded, essentially, but were not actually on the rocket when it exploded, and so are safe. In the short term, they should still be able to do that. It just depends how long it takes New Glenn to get back to where it was and to then advance to be kind of reliably launched, because that will affect how fast they can grow the satellite business, essentially. And the production for those satellites is in Kirkland. There's like a factory out there, not actually far from where SpaceX does similar work. And the bottleneck at this point isn't really the production anymore. It is the launch. And so, they have other providers, but to really get to the pace that they want and need to really create this big, successful network, they do need this to work eventually.
How much is Jeff Bezos investing in Blue Origin versus Amazon?
His investment in Amazon is actually kind of the inverse. I mean, he sells his shares in Amazon to invest in Blue Origin at this point. He's still by far the largest individual shareholder in Amazon, but he owns Blue Origin, and it's very clearly, by all the reporting I and others have done, a huge focus of his attention and time, and a big part of what he sees as his legacy. And he has made very clear that he was not going to be deterred by this explosion, that he was going to rebuild, and that he sees it as important work. So they're clearly are committed to it. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Okay, lots of plans for the future there. Where does Blue Origin go from here now that New Glenn has exploded?
I mean, they have to figure out what happened so they can fix whatever system, if it's complex or it could be simple in some sense. And then they have to physically rebuild. And so that is the next step. Nothing can happen until they have a launch pad again, basically. So they can do work to prepare for the next launch, but until they have a launch pad that is rebuilt, approved, all those things, they can't really go up. So that's inevitably going to be a kind of the front burner issue. Those two things, figuring out what went wrong and how to fix it, and then repairing the launch pad itself.
All right, to be continued. Before I let you go, what are you going to be watching for next in the Seattle area realm of the space race?
Oh, it's a great question. Yeah. I mean, I think there is a question of, as these ramp up, so much production is here. I'll be curious if we see expanded production here. And then also broadly, again, Blue Origin is based here. While a lot of their launch stuff is happening out in Florida, Kent is their headquarters, essentially. And so I think will be interesting to see, they had done layoffs a while back, and just to see broadly how they kind of keep their focus and resolve as they kind of work through these setbacks.
Karen Weise is the technology correspondent for the New York Times. Really appreciate it. Always good to talk.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to Seattle Now, and make sure you join us this Saturday for a live taping of the show. I'll be interviewing King County Executive Girmay Zahilay for the Cascade PBS Ideas Festival. You can get tickets at cascadepbs.org/Ideas Festival or click that link in the show notes. Either way, make sure you use that promo code Seattle Now for that awesome 20% discount. Looking forward to seeing you at the taping. Today's episode was produced by Brooklyn Jamerson Flowers. It was edited by Andy Hurst. Our production team also includes Caroline Chamberlain-Gomez, Vaughn Jones, Anna Marie Yanni, and Paige Browning. Greg Kramer does our theme music. Seattle Now and KUOW Public Radio are members of the NPR network. I'm Patricia Murphy. Talk to you tonight for Evening Headlines.